Why do people behave as they do? Do people have some choice in shaping their own personality? What accounts for similarities and differences among people? And what make us act predictable? And why are we still so unpredictable? Do hidden unconscious forces control people's behavior? And what causes mental disturbances? Is human behavior shaped more by heredity or by environment? In fact, I don't know. These are the sort of questions that have long held the fascination of psychologists and which have inspired a number of different theories of personality. More than that, 100 years ago, Sigmund Freud began to combine philosophical speculation with a primitive scientific method. As a neurologist trained in science, Freud began to listen to his patients to find out their hidden conflicts that lay behind their assortment of symptoms. For him, listening became more than an art. It became a method, a privileged road to knowledge that his patient mapped out for him. Freud, in fact, was the first to develop a truly modern theory of personality, based mostly on his clinical observations. He developed a grand theory that is one that attempts to explain all personality for all people. As we see throughout the course, or as we will see throughout this course, many other theories from different points of view have developed alternative grand theories. The general trend over the course of the 20th century was to base theories more and more on scientific observations than on clinical ones. But however, both sources are valid foundations for theories of personality. So, come along and learn about personality, the subject that has mystified and intrigued men and women for thousands of years. Now, in this video, we will define personality, we will talk about theory, and certain perspectives and theories of personality. We will also talk about a way to evaluate the theories that we will be talking about in the future. Lastly, we will end this video by talking about research and the dimensions of research that are used in personality psychology. Now, the subject of human personality is a fascinating one, well, to say the least, and with good reasons. Personality affects everything we do, every endeavor that we engage in. It's absolutely central to our humanity. So, exactly what is this thing called personality that intrigued and baffled scholars, doctors, scientists, and other curious folks for centuries? Now, while personality is something that we talk about all the time, we say something like he has such a great personality, or her personality is perfect for the job, or my personal favorite with pleasing personality. You might be surprised to learn that psychologists do not necessarily agree on a single definition of what exactly constitutes personality. Most agree that the word personality originated from the Latin persona, which referred to a theoretical mask worn by Roman actors in Greek dramas. Now, these ancient Roman actors wore a mask or persona to project a role or a false appearance. This surface view of personality, of course, is not an acceptable definition. When psychologists use the term personality, they are referring to something more than the role that people play. Although no single definition is acceptable to all personality theorists, we can say that personality is a pattern of relatively permanent traits and unique characteristics that give both consistency and individuality to a person's behavior. Now, this definition highlighted two more terms. that are usually used interchangeably in common language, but in the study of personality and science in general are, well, different. You have traits and characteristics. Now, it's like inception, our pursuit to define personality led us to define traits and personality. Anyway, and characteristic. Anyway, when we refer to traits, we say that traits contribute to individual differences in behavior, consistency of behavior over time, and stability of behavior across situations. Traits may be unique, common to some groups, or shared by the entire species. But their pattern is different from each individual. Thus, each person, though like others in some way, has a unique personality. In biology, traits include hair color, leaf shape or size, and behavioral features such as bird nesting or even your circadian rhythm. On the other hand, when we say characteristics, we refer to them as unique qualities of an individual that include such attributes as temperament, physique, and intelligence. Now, research have found while some external factors can influence how certain traits are expressed, personality originates within the individual. While a few aspects of personality may change as we grow older, personality also tend to remain fairly consistent throughout life. Going back to what I have said earlier, that certain external factors influence personality, it's also important that we talk about personality and culture. Now, a person's culture is one of the most important environmental factors shaping their personality. Personality psychologists are interested in understanding the role that culture plays in the development of personality. Research investigating the the variations of personality traits across culture suggests that there are both universal and culture-specific aspects that account for these variations. Now, the term culture refers to all of the beliefs, customs, ideas, behaviors, and traditions of a particular society that are passed through generations. Culture is transmitted to people through language as well as through the modeling of behavior, and it identifies which trait and behaviors are considered important, desirable, or undesirable. Within a culture, there are norms and behavioral expectations. These cultural norms can dictate which personality traits are considered important. The researcher and psychologist Gordon Allport considered culture to be an important influence on trait and defined common traits as those that are recognized within a culture. These traits may vary from culture to culture based on differing values, needs, and beliefs. Positive and negative traits can be determined by cultural expectations, like what is considered a positive trait in one culture may be considered negative in another culture, thus resulting in different expressions of personality across cultures. Considering cultural influences on personality is important because Western ideas and theories are not necessarily applicable to other theories or other cultures. There is a great deal of evidence that the strength of personality traits varies across cultures. And this is especially true when comparing individual or individualistic cultures such as that of European, Northern American, Australian cultures, and collectivist cultures such as African, South American, and Asian cultures. Now, people who live in individualistic cultures tend to believe that independence, competition, and personal achievement are important. In contrast, people who live in collectivist cultures tend to value social harmony, respectfulness, and group needs over individual needs. These values influence personality in different but substantial manner. For example, in 2006, Yang found that the people in individualistic cultures displayed more personally oriented personality traits, whereas people in collectivist cultures displayed more socially oriented personality traits. Now, in much the same manner that cultural norms can influence personality and behavior, gender norms, the behaviors that males and females are expected to conform to in a given society, can also influence personality by emphasizing different traits between different genders. Ideas of appropriate behavior for each gender that is masculine or feminine vary among cultures and tend to change over time. For example, aggression and assertiveness have historically been emphasized as positive masculine personality traits in the United States. Meanwhile, submissiveness and caretaking behaviors have historically been held as ideal feminine traits not only in the United States but also in westernized cultures such as the Philippines. While many gender roles remain the same, others changed over time. In 1939, for example, only 1 out of 5 Americans agreed that a married couple or a married woman should earn money in industry and business. By 1996, however, 4 out of 5 Americans approved of women working in these fields. Now, this type of attitude change has been accompanied by behavioral shifts that coincide with change in trait expectations and shift in personal identity for both men and women. And this is true not only in Western world, this is also true in the Philippines, where we are seeing more and more women in the workforce, and societies and the Filipino society is being more accepting of this trend. So aside from defining personality, it's also important that we look at theory. Now, the word theory has the dubious distinction of being one of the most misused and misunderstood words in the English language. Some people contrast theory to truth or fact, but such an antithesis demonstrates a fundamental lack of understanding of all three terms. In science, theories are tools used to generate research and organize observations, but neither truth nor fact has a place in scientific terminology. So, a scientific theory is a set of related assumptions that allow scientists to hold logical deductive reasoning to formulate testable hypotheses. This definition needs further explanation. First, a theory is a set of assumptions. A single assumption can never fill all the requirements of an adequate theory. So, a single assumption, for example, could not serve to integrate several observations, something a useful theory should do. Second, a theory is a set of related assumptions. Isolated assumptions can neither generate meaningful hypotheses nor possess internal consistency to criteria of a useful theory. A third keyword in the definition is assumptions. The component of a theory are not proven facts in the sense that their validity has been absolutely established. They are, however, accepted as if they were true. This is a practical step taken so that the scientist can conduct useful research, the results of which continue to contribute or build and shape the original theory. Fourth, logical deductive reasoning is used by the researcher to formulate hypotheses. Now, the tenets of a theory must be stated with sufficient precision and logical consistency to permit scientists to deduce clearly stated hypotheses. na the hypotheses are not components of a theory but flow from it. It is the job of an imaginative scientist to begin with a general theory and through deductive reasoning arrive at a particular hypothesis that can be tested. If the general theoretical propositions are illogical, they remain sterile and incapable of generating hypotheses. Moreover, if a researcher uses faulty logic in deducing hypotheses, the resulting research will be meaningless and will make no contributions to the ongoing process of theory construction. Now, the final part of the definition includes the qualifier testable. Unless a hypothesis can be tested in some way, it is worthless. The hypothesis need not be tested immediately, but it must suggest the possibility that scientists in the future might develop the necessary means to test it. Now, a useful theory has a mutual and dynamic interaction with research data. First, a theory generates a number of hypotheses that can be investigated through research, thus yielding research data. These data flow back into the theory and reconstruct it. From this newly contoured theory, scientists can extract other hypotheses, leading to more research and additional data, which in turn reshape and enlarge the theory even more. This cyclical relationship continues for as long as the theory proves useful. Second, a useful theory organizes research data in a meaningful structure and provides an explanation for the result of scientific research. When a theory is no longer able to generate additional research or to explain related research data, it loses its usefulness and is set aside in favor for a more useful one. Sakit. In addition to sparking research and explaining research data, a useful theory must lend itself to confirmation or disconfirmation, provide the practitioner with a guide of action, be consistent with itself, and be as simple as possible. Therefore, we evaluate each of the theories we will talk about in the coming weeks on the basis of these 6 categories. Alright, so let's talk about them one by one. Now, the most important criteria of a useful theory is its ability to stimulate and guide further research. Without an adequate theory to point the way, many of science's present empirical findings would have remained undiscovered. In astronomy, for example, the planet Neptune was discovered because the theory of motion generated the hypothesis that the irregularity in the path of Uranus must be caused by the presence of another planet. Useful theory provided astronomers with a roadmap that guided their search for and discovery of the new planet. A useful theory will generate 2 different kinds of research: descriptive research and hypothesis testing. Descriptive research, which can rather expand an existing theory, is concerned with the measurement, labeling, and categorization of the units employed in theory building. Descriptive research has a symbolic relationship with theory. On one hand, it provides the building blocks for the theory, and on the other, it receives its impetus from the dynamic expanding theory. The more useful the theory, the more research generated by it, the greater the amount of descriptive research, the more complete the theory. The second kind of research generated by a useful theory is hypothesis testing researches, which leads to an indirect verification of the usefulness of the theory. As we have noted earlier, a useful theory will generate many hypotheses that, and when tested, add to the database that may reshape and even enlarge the theory. The second is that, is it falsifiable? A theory must also be evaluated on its ability to be confirmed or disconfirmed. That is, it must be falsifiable. To be falsifiable, a theory must be precise enough to suggest research that may either support or fail to support its major tenets. If a theory is so vague and nebulous that both positive and negative research results can be interpreted as support, then the theory is not falsifiable and ceases to be useful. Falsifiability, however, is not the same as false. It simply means that negative research result will refute the theory and force the theorist to either discard or modify the theory. A falsifiable theory is accountable to experimental results. Science is distinguished from non-science by its ability to reject ideas that are not supported empirically, even though they seem logical and rational. For example, Aristotle used logic to argue that lighter bodies fall at slower rates than heavier bodies. Although this argument may have agreed with common sense, it had one problem. It was empirically wrong. Theories that rely heavily on unobservable transformation in the unconscious are exceedingly difficult to either verify or falsify. For example, Freud's theory suggests that many of our emotions and behaviors are motivated by unconscious tendencies that are directly opposite to ones we express in the moment. For instance, unconscious hate might be expressed as conscious love, or unconscious fear of one's own homosexuality, homosexual feelings might take the form of exaggerated hostility towards homosexual individuals. Confusing, right? Because Freud's theory allows for such transformation within the unconscious, it's nearly impossible to either verify or falsify. A theory that can explain everything explains nothing. We're not haters of Freud. We're just saying, we're just looking at Freud's ideas through the perspective of science. Number three is that a useful theory organizes data. A useful theory should also be able to organize those research data that are not incompatible with each other. Without some organization or classification, research findings would remain isolated and meaningless. Unless data are organized into some intelligible framework, scientists are left with no clear direction to follow in the pursuit of further knowledge. They cannot ask intelligent questions without theoretical framework that organizes their information. Without intelligent questions, further research is severely curtailed. A useful theory of personality must be capable of integrating what is currently known about human behavior and personality development. It must be able to shape as many bits of information as possible into a meaningful arrangement. If a personality theory does not offer a reasonable explanation of at least some kinds of behavior, it ceases to be useful. The fourth characteristic of a useful theory is that it should guide action. It rests on its ability to guide the practitioner over the rough course of a day-to-day problem. For example, parents, teachers, business managers, and psychotherapists are confronted continually with an avalanche of questions for which they try to find workable answers. Good theory provides a structure for finding many of those answers. Without a useful theory, practitioners would stumble in the darkness of trial and error techniques with a sound theoretical trial and error techniques. With a sound theoretical orientation, they can discern a suitable course of action. For the Freudian psychoanalyst and the Rogerian counselor, answers to the same question would be very different. To the question, how can I best treat this patient, the psychoanalyst therapist might answer along the lines, if psychoneuroses are caused by childhood sexual conflicts that have become unconscious, then I can help this patient best by delving into these repressed and repressions and allowing the patient to relieve the experience in the absence of conflict. In the same question, or to the same question, the Rogerian therapist might answer, if in order to grow psychologically, people need empathy, unconditional positive regard, and a relationship with a congruent therapist, then I can best help this client by providing an accepting, non-threatening atmosphere. Notice that both therapists constructed their answer in an if-then framework, even though the two answers call for very different course of actions. Also included in the criteria is the extent to which the theory stimulates thought and action in other disciplines such as art, literature, including movies and television dramas, law, sociology, philosophy, religion, TikTok, education, business, and even social media. Now, most of the theories discussed in that we are going to discuss have some influence in areas beyond psychology. For example, Freud theories have prompted research on recovered memory, a topic very important to the legal profession. And it has also stimulated interest in movies, in the Netflix series. Also, Carl Jung's theory is of great interest to many theologians and had captured the imagination of popular writers such as Joseph Campbell and others. Similarly, the ideas of Alfred Adler, Erik Erikson, B.F. Skinner, Abraham Maslow, Carl Rogers, Rollo May, and other personalities theories have sparked interest and action in a broad range of scholarly fields. If you there's even a military project based on Skinner's theory of reinforcement, where bombs were designed, or rather pigeons were taught to drive bombs or fly bombs into their target. Now, the fifth characteristic of a useful theory is internal consistency. So, a useful theory need not be consistent with other theories, but it must be consistent with itself. An internally consistent theory is one whose components are logically compatible. Its limitations of scope are carefully defined, and it does not offer explanations that lie beyond the scope. Also, an internally consistent theory uses language in a consistent manner. That is, it does not use the same term to mean two different things, nor does it use two separate terms to refer to the same concept. A good theory will use concepts and terms that have been clearly and operationally defined. An operational definition is one that defines units in terms of observable events or behaviors that can be measured. For example, an extrovert, an extrovert can be operationally defined as any person who attains a predetermined score on a particularly personality trait. Then last is that it should be parsimonious. parsimonious. When two theories are equal in their ability to generate research, be falsified, give meaning to data, guide practitioner, and be self-consistent, the simpler one is preferred. This is the law of parsimony. In fact, of course, two theories are never exactly equal in these other abilities. But in general, simple, straightforward theories are more useful than ones that bog down under the weight of complicated concept and esoteric language. So, if theories of personality are truly scientific, why do we have so many different ones, right? Alternate theories exist because the very nature of a theory allows the theorist to make speculation from a particular point of view. Theorists must be as objective as possible when gathering data, but their decision as to what data are collected and how these data are interpreted are personal ones. Theories are not immutable laws. They are built not on proven facts, but on assumptions that are subject to individual interpretation. All theories are a reflection of their author's personal background, childhood experiences, philosophy of life, interpersonal relationships, and unique manner of looking at the world. Because observations are colored by the individual observer's frame of reference, it follows that there may be many diverse theories. Nevertheless, divergent theories can be useful. The usefulness of a theory does not depend on its common sense value or on its agreement with other theories. Rather, it depends on its ability to generate research, to explain research data, and other observations. One of the primary functions of scientific theory is to describe and explain how the world works. Psychologists attempt to explain how human thought, emotions, motivations, and behavior work. Yet, human personality is so complex that many different perspectives have developed on how to best explain it. These perspectives make different assumptions and focus on different aspects of behavior. In psychology, there are at least 5 major theoretical perspectives on what personality is and how it develops. In this part of the video, we are going to visit quickly these 5 theoretical perspectives. The first, of course, is psychodynamic theories. Beginning with Freud, psychoanalytic and then the more general psychodynamic approaches have focused on the importance of early childhood experiences and on our relationship with parents as guiding forces that shape personality development. Additionally, this view sees the unconscious mind and motives as much more powerful than conscious awareness. Psychoanalysis traditionally uses dream interpretation to uncover the unconscious thoughts, feelings, and impulses as a main form of treatment of neurosis and mental illness. After Freud, these theorists move away from the importance of sexuality and move towards social and cultural forces. Now, the second group of theories or perspective is called the humanistic existential theories. The primary assumption of this group, currently known as positive psychology, is that people strive towards meaning, growth, well-being, happiness, and psychological health. States of positive emotions and happiness foster psychological health and pro-social behavior. Understanding these evolved positive aspects of human development or human behavior provides just as much insight into human nature as does understanding the pathological aspect. Existential theories assume that not only are we driven by a search for meaning, but also the negative experiences such as failure, awareness of death, death of a loved one, and anxiety as part of the human condition and can foster psychological growth. The third is that of dispositional theories. Dispositional theorists argue that the unique and long-term tendency to behave in particular ways are the essence of our personality. These unique dispositions, such as extraversion or anxiety, are called traits. The field has converged on understanding that there are 5 main traits, dimensions in human personality. Traits serve the functions of making certain behaviors more likely in some people. The fourth is that of biological evolutionary theories. Behavior, thoughts, feelings, and personality are influenced by difference in basic genetic, epigenetic, and neurological systems between individuals. The reason some people have different traits, disposition, and ways of thinking stem from differences in their genotype and central nervous system, that is, brain structures and neurochemistry. Because they are based on evolved brain systems, human thought, behavior, and personality have been shaped by forces of evolution, natural and sexual selection over millions of years. The body, brain, and environment coexist and co-evolve, and so many more than any other psychological perspectives. This one emphasizes that the way we think, feel, and do is always an interaction between nature, biological, and nurture, that is environmental. Lastly, you have learning or social cognitive theories. If you want to understand behaviors, then focus only on behaviors, not on hypothetical and unobservable internal states such as thoughts, feelings, the unconscious, drives, or even motives. All behaviors are learned through association and or consequences, whether it is reinforced or punished. To shape desired behaviors, we have to understand and then establish the conditions that bring about those particular behaviors. Now, the cognitive perspective argues that how we think about ourselves and other people, as well as the assumptions we make and the strategies we use to solve problems, are the key to understanding differences between people. Whether we believe we do something successfully or not influences our behavior as well as our personality. In short, what personality we have is shaped by how we think and perceive the world. Now, because personality theories grow from theorists' own personalities, wow, that's so meta. A study of those personalities is appropriate. In recent years, a subdiscipline of psychology called psychology of science has begun to look at personal traits of scientists. The psychology of science studies both science and the behavior of scientists. That is, it investigates the impact of an individual scientist's psychological processes and the personal characteristics on the development of her or his scientific theories and research in research. In other words, the psychology of science examines how scientists' personalities, cognitive processes, developmental histories, and social experiences affect the kind of science they conduct and the theories they create. Now, indeed, a number of investigators have demonstrated that personality differences influence one's theoretical orientation as well as others' inclination to lean towards the hard or soft side of a discipline. An understanding of theories of personality rests on information regarding the historical, social, and psychological worlds of each theorist at the time of his or her theorizing. Because we believe that personality theories reflect the theorist's personality, we will also talk about the biographical information of each major theorist. Indeed, personality differences among theorists account for fundamental disagreement between those who lean toward the quantitative side. And those who are inclined towards the clinical and qualitative side of psychology. You have psychoanalysis, humanists, and existentialists. Although a theory's personality partially shapes his or her theory, it should not be the sole determinant of that theory. Likewise, your acceptance of one or another theory should not rest on only on your personal values and biases. When evaluating and choosing a theory, you should acknowledge the impact of the theorist's personal history on the theory. But you also should ultimately evaluate it on the basis of scientific criteria that are independent of that personal history. So, some observers have distinguished between science as a process and science as a product. The scientific process may be influenced by the personal characteristics of the scientist, but the ultimate usefulness of the scientific product is and must not be evaluated independently of the process. Thus, your evaluation of each of these theories will talk about how should rest more, or we will talk about should rest more on objective criteria than your subjective likes and dislikes. So, lastly, we still have two more topics pala. Now, personal theories differ on basic issues concerning the nature of humanity. Each personality theory reflects authors' assumptions about humanity. These assumptions rest on several broad dimensions that separate the various personality theorists. We will use 6 of these dimensions as a framework for viewing each theory's concept of humanity. The first dimension is determinism versus free will or free choice. Are people's behaviors determined by forces over which they have no control, or can people choose to be what they wish to be? Can behavior be partially free and partially determined at the same time? Although the dimension of determinism versus free will is more philosophical than scientific, the position theorists take on this issue shape their way of looking at people and color their concept of humanity. A second issue is one of pessimism versus optimism. Are people doomed to live miserable, conflicted, and troubled lives? Or can they change and grow into psychologically healthy, happy, fully functioning human beings? In general, personality theories who believe in determinism tend to be pessimistic. Skinner was a notable exception to this, whereas those who believe in free choice are usually optimistic. A third dimension for viewing a theory's concept of humanity is causality versus teleology. Briefly, causality holds that behavior is a function of past experiences, whereas teleology is an explanation of behaviors in terms of future goals or purposes. Do people act as they do because of what has happened to them in the past? Or do they act as they do because they have certain expectations of what will happen in the future? A fourth consideration that divides personality theorists is their attitude towards conscious versus unconscious determinants of behaviors. Are people ordinarily aware of what they are doing and why they are doing it? Or do unconscious forces impinge on them and drive them to act without awareness of these underlying forces? The fifth question is one of biological versus social influences on personality. Are people mostly creatures of biology, or are their personalities shaped largely by their social relationships? A more specific element of this issue is heredity versus environment. That is, are personal characteristics more the result of heredity, or are they environmentally determined? The sixth and final issue is uniqueness versus similarities. Is the salient features of people their individuality, or is their common characteristics? Should the study of personality concentrate on those traits that make people alike, or should it look at the traits that make people different? Now, these and other basic issues that separate personality theories have resulted in truly different personality theories, not merely difference in terminology. We could not erase the differences among personality theories by adopting a common language. The differences are philosophical and deep-seated. Each personality theory reflects the individual personality of its creator, and each creator has a unique philosophical orientation shaped in part by early childhood experiences, birth order, gender, training, education, experiences of trauma, patterns of patterns of interpersonal relationships. Now, these differences help determine whether a theorist will become deterministic or a believer of free choice, will be pessimistic or optimistic, will adopt a causal explanation or a teleological one. They also help determine whether the theorist emphasizes consciousness or unconsciousness, biological or social factors, uniqueness or similarities of people. Now, these differences do not, however, negate the possibility that two theorists with opposing views of humanity can be equally scientific in their data gathering and theory building. Lastly, let's talk about research in personality psychology. Now, as we have pointed out earlier, the primary criterion for a useful theory is its ability to generate research. We also noted that theories and research data have a cyclical relationship. Theory gives meaning to data, and data results from experimental research designed to test hypotheses generated by the theory. Not all data, however, flow from experimental research. Much of it comes from observations that each of us make every day. To observe simply means to notice something, to pay attention. You have been observing human personalities, I bet, for as nearly as you have been alive. You probably have your own theory of personality. You probably have your own ideas of how and why people behave. You notice that some people are talkative and outgoing, others are quiet and reserved, and you may have even labeled such people as extroverted or introverted. Are these labels accurate? Is one extroverted person like another? Does an extrovert always act in a talkative, outgoing manner? Can all people be classified either as introvert or extrovert? In making observations and asking questions, you're doing some of the same things psychologists do. That is, observing human behaviors and trying to make sense of these observations. However, psychologists, like other scientists, try to be systematic so that their predictions will be consistent and accurate. To improve their ability to predict, Personality psychologists have developed a number of assessment techniques, including personality inventories. Much of the research reported much of the research that we will look at in the following weeks have relied on various assessment procedures which purport to measure different dimensions of personality. For these instruments to be useful, they must be both reliable and valid. The reliability of a measuring instrument is the extent to which it yields consistent result. Okay? So personality inventories may be reliable and yet lack validity or accuracy. Validity is the degree to which an instrument measures what it is supposed to measure. Personality psychologists are primarily concerned with two types of validity: construct validity and predictive validity. Construct validity is the extent to which an instrument measures some hypothetical construct. Constructs such as extroversion, aggressiveness, intelligence, love, emotional stability have no physical existence. They are called hypothetical constructs that should relate to observable behaviors. Three important types of construct validity are convergent validity, divergent validity, and discriminant validity. A measuring instrument has convergent construct validity to the extent that the score on that instrument correlate highly or converge with scores of a variety of valid measures of the same construct. For example, a personal inventory that attempts to measure, let's say, gaslighting should correlate with other measures of physical or emotional abuse or other factors that are similar to gaslighting. Another personality inventory that attempts, let's say, to measure extraversion should correlate highly with other measures of extraversion or other factors such as sociability and assertiveness that are known to cluster together with extraversion. An inventory has divergent construct validity if it has low or insignificant correlation with other inventories that do not measure the construct. For example, an inventory that means to measure extraversion should not be highly correlated with social desirability, emotional stability, honesty, or self-esteem. In the same manner, a measure or an inventory that aims to measure, let's say, gaslighting should not or should have low correlation with experiences of positive social relationships. Finally, an inventory has a discriminant validity if it discriminates between two groups of people known to be different. For example, a personality inventory measuring extraversion should yield higher scores for people known to be extroverted than other people known to be introverted. A second dimension of validity is predictive validity, or the extent that the test predicts some future behaviors. For example, a test of extraversion has a predictive validity if it correlates with future behaviors such as smoking cigarettes, performing well on scholastic tests, taking risks, or any other independent criterion. The ultimate value of any measuring instrument is the degree to which it can predict some future behavior or condition. Most of the early personality theorists did not use standardized assessment inventories. Although Freud, Adler, and Jung all developed some form of projective tool, none of them used the technique with sufficient precision to establish its reliability and validity. However, the theories of Freud, Adler, and Jung have spawned a number of standardized personality inventories as researchers and clinicians have sought to measure units of personality proposed by those theories. Later, personality theories, especially Julian Rotter, Hans Eysenck, and the five-factor theories have developed and used a number of personality measures and have relied heavily on them in constructing their theoretical models. So, in this video lesson, we learned that the term personality comes from the Latin persona, or the mask that people present to the outside world. But psychologists see personality as a much more, or rather as much more than outward appearance. Personality includes all those relatively permanent traits or characteristics that render some consistency of a person's behavior. Theory, on the other hand, is a set of related assumptions that allow scientists to formulate testable hypotheses. Theory should not be confused with philosophy, speculation, hypothesis, or taxonomy, although it's related to each of these terms. Personality theories cover at least five distinct perspectives: psychodynamic, humanistic positive, dispositional, biological, evolutionary, and learning dispositional. Now, six criteria determine the usefulness of scientific theory, and each personality theories has had either an implicit or explicit concept of humanity. Speaking of which, concept of humanity, of human nature, can be discussed from six perspectives. You have determinism versus free choice, pessimism versus optimism, causality versus teleology, conscious versus unconscious determinants, biological versus social factors, and uniqueness versus similarity in people. Now, this is the end of our lesson. My name is Lex Kamitan, and thank you for watching.